Walter Griggs married his son's widow, Elena, just 48 hours after Daniel was found murdered in his own home, and that was only the beginning. As the town whispered about betrayal and scandal, a hidden will vanished. A lawyer turned up dead, and Detective Sam Keller began to unravel a web of secrets that stretched back years. What began as a quiet homicide in a wealthy suburb would soon expose a twisted triangle of obsession, control, and a conspiracy so calculated it made murder look like the smallest crime. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and the quiet hum of luxury sedans pulling into driveways just before sunset. A place built on routine and order. That illusion shattered on a cold Thursday morning in February. At exactly 6:14 a.m., a single 911 call was placed from the Griggs residence. The voice on the other end was calm, controlled, even clinical. "There's been an accident," the woman said. "My husband. He's not breathing." By the time paramedics arrived, the man identified as Daniel Griggs was already dead. He was lying face down in the study, a pool of dried blood forming beneath his head. A single gunshot wound marked the back of his skull. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no disturbed furniture, no missing valuables. The gun was gone. The scene was too perfect, too neat. Daniel was a well-known attorney in the area, ambitious, charming, and fiercely intelligent. He was expected to follow in his father's footsteps. His father, Walter Griggs, was a retired judge, respected, feared, and deeply influential in the city's legal circle. The Griggs family name carried weight, and Daniel had worn it like armor. His rise through the legal system had been fast, almost suspiciously smooth. People admired him, some envied him, but no one had ever expected this. Elena Griggs, his wife of just under 2 years, was the one who made the call. She told detectives she had gone to the gym early that morning, a habit she'd recently picked up. When she returned, she said the house was unusually quiet. She had found Daniel in the study, unresponsive. She hadn't touched anything. She hadn't moved the body. She just called for help. Detective Sam Keller was among the first to arrive. He had seen clean murder scenes before, but this one was something else. It didn't look like someone trying to hide a crime. It looked like someone had erased. Daniel's desk was spotless. His laptop was powered off. The blinds were half closed, letting in just enough light to cast long shadows across the room. Keller noticed something immediately, a faint imprint of a second coffee cup on the desk. Only one cup was found at the scene. Elena sat in the living room, wrapped in a white throw blanket, her eyes dry. She was composed, too composed. She answered questions with short, direct replies, no trembling hands, no erratic speech. She said they had been happy. No recent arguments, no threats, no strange behavior from Daniel. Just a normal morning gone wrong. The autopsy revealed Daniel had died instantly from the shot. The bullet had entered cleanly, at close range. There were no signs of struggle on his body, no defensive wounds. Toxicology came back clean. He hadn't been drugged. He hadn't fought back. Whoever did this knew Daniel's schedule. They knew when Elena would be gone, and they knew exactly where to find him. By the end of the day, the neighborhood was buzzing. Camera crews began to circle. Reporters knocked on. The local news led with the story of a beloved son and husband murdered in his own home. Whispers spread fast. Was it a robbery, a professional hit, a domestic fight gone too far? Detective Keller didn't think it was any of those. Something about the timing, the details too deliberate, too quiet. He kept replaying Elena's 911 call in his head. Her voice hadn't cracked, not once. There had been no panic in her tone, no shock, just a cold acceptance, like she had been waiting for, or worse, like she had known it was coming. The Griggs house was sealed for investigation, but Keller knew the real work wouldn't happen there. The truth was hiding in the shadows out of view, protected by the Griggs family name, and wrapped in the silence of a widow who seemed too calm, too untouched by the horror that had unfolded just down the hall. The town was still reeling from Daniel Griggs's murder when the second shock came, one that would eclipse even the violence of his death. Just 48 hours after Daniel was found dead in his study, a marriage license was quietly filed at the county clerk's office. The names on the document sent ripples of disbelief through every courtroom, newsroom, and quiet suburban living room in the area. Walter Griggs, Daniel's father, had married Elena. There had been no ceremony, no announcement, The paperwork had been processed under the radar, buried among hundreds of daily filings, but nothing stayed buried for long, not with a name like Griggs. Within hours the story broke. Retired Judge marries son's widow 2 days after his murder. It sounded like a tabloid headline, something designed to provoke outrage, but it was real, too real. The public was stunned. Friends of the family were horrified. Former colleagues of Walter, once proud to be seen in his presence, now avoided the phone calls they used to take without hesitation. Social media exploded. There were calls for investigations. Rumors of secret affairs and long-standing betrayals filled comment sections and chat rooms. Was this grief, madness, or something darker? Elena refused interviews. The few times she was seen in public, she wore oversized sunglasses and walked quickly, with Walter just a few steps behind. He looked composed, even satisfied. The image of the once great judge walking arm in arm with the woman who had been his son's wife just days ago was almost too much to process. No one could explain it, and no one could look away. Detective Sam Keller couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't spontaneous. Nothing about it seemed emotional or impulsive. It was methodical. Walter Griggs had always been calculated, a man who spoke in measured tones and acted only when the odds favored him. And now he had made the most controversial move of his life while under the shadow of his son's unresolved murder. The timing wasn't suspicious, it was surgical. Keller went back to the case file. Daniel had left behind a fortune in assets, real estate, stocks, trust funds, and an expansive legal portfolio tied to several ongoing cases. At the time of his death, everything had been frozen, pending the outcome of the investigation. But the moment Walter and Elena married, the legal landscape changed. As Daniel's legal widow and his next of kin spouse, Elena's financial position strengthened considerably. Walter, as her husband, now had influence over any estate distribution. It was a move so coldly efficient that Keller wondered if Daniel's death was just a piece on a much larger board. In quiet corners of the investigation, people began to talk. Officers whispered behind closed doors. Lawyers called in favors to check sealed documents. An anonymous tip landed on Keller's desk, an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph. It was dated nearly a year before Daniel's death. It showed Walter and Elena together alone, at a private beachside restaurant 2 counties away. They were seated closely. No disguise, no attempt to hide. The timestamp proved it was taken during a time when Daniel had been out of the country on business. Was this an affair, a conspiracy, or something even worse? Keller brought the photo to the DA's office, but with no confession and no direct evidence linking Walter or Elena to the murder, there was nothing they could act on. Just smoke, no fire. Yet, public pressure mounted. Journalists started pulling Walter's old cases apart, looking for patterns, enemies, or anything to explain how a respected judge had gone from courtroom icon to possible suspect in his own son's death. Still, Walter made no public statements, no denials, no apology. It was as if in marrying Elena, he had declared something without needing words, a quiet message written in action, that the past was buried, and he wasn't afraid of what people might find. Keller knew better. The past never stayed buried for long. The story had already taken a dark, twisted turn with the sudden marriage, but it was what came next that truly unsettled those watching from the shadow. Just when it seemed like the scandal had peaked, a curious detail emerged, quietly at first, like a whisper carried through the courthouse halls. Daniel Griggs had changed his will 2 weeks before he died. It wasn't just a revision, it was a complete overhaul. According to a reliable but nervous source, Daniel had scheduled a private meeting with a lawyer named Howard Winslow, someone with a reputation for handling sensitive, high-profile cases under a veil of discretion. The meeting had taken place after hours in Winslow's private office. No secretaries, no assistants, just the 2 of them, and a single copy of the new document. The contents of that new will were never registered in probate. The official record still listed an older version that left the majority of Daniel's estate to his wife, Elena. But according to the source, the revised document named a new unnamed beneficiary, a trust that had never existed before. The paper trail ended at that conversation, as if someone had wiped the record clean. Then, just 3 days after Daniel's murder, Howard Winslow was killed in a car accident, a late-night collision on a rain-slicked road. He had been alone. The cause was ruled mechanical failure, brakes that failed at exactly the wrong moment. His office was sealed, then mysteriously cleared out before investigators could access his files. By the time authorities arrived, the safe was empty, and his hard drives had been removed. Detective Keller knew the timing wasn't just suspicious, it was precision. Daniel changes his will, then Daniel dies, then the only person who knew the contents of that will also dies, in an accident too convenient to ignore. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a cleanup job. Keller pulled every string he could to dig deep. He spoke with Winslow's clients, colleagues, even the cleaning staff at the office complex. Everyone said the same thing: Winslow had been tense in the days before his death. One staff member recalled overhearing a heated phone call. Winslow had slammed his office door saying, "He's onto something. I'm not covering for anyone this time." But the question remained, what was Daniel onto, and why had he tried to move everything into a mysterious trust just days before he was murdered? Margot Pierce, the relentless investigative journalist who had been chasing the Griggs story since day one, smelled blood. She had already uncovered one hidden detail about Walter and Elena's past, but this new development changed everything. If Daniel had discovered something dark enough to make him rewrite his entire will, it suggested he didn't trust his wife or his father. And if that trust had broken, maybe he had left a trail behind. Maybe he knew what was coming. She began tracing Howard Winslow's last known movement. One hotel receipt, one phone call, one late-night visit to a print shop. Piece by piece, the outline of something larger began to emerge. Winslow hadn't just drafted a will, he'd printed copies. At least one other version had been made, possibly mailed, possibly hid. If it still existed, it could destroy Walter and Elena, it could reveal everything. And yet, there was no sign of it. No digital file, no paper copy. It had vanished like everything else connected to Daniel's final weeks. Back at the station, Keller stared at the crime board. The murder, the marriage, the missing will. Each thread ran in one direction: control. Someone had orchestrated all of it with one goal: securing power, wealth, and silence. But what they didn't know was that Daniel may have anticipated his own end. And if he had, then somewhere, maybe hidden in plain sight, was the final piece. A document powerful enough to bring down a judge and reveal the truth behind a murder made to look like nothing at all. Detective Sam Keller had worked homicide for over a decade. He'd seen revenge killings, crimes of passion, and premeditated schemes so twisted they bordered on theatrical. But nothing about the Griggs case fit neatly into any category. A son murdered in his own home, a father marrying his widowed daughter-in-law 2 days later, and a vanished will pointing toward a conspiracy. The pieces were all there, but the picture still didn't make sense. Keller knew the answers lay in the past, and there was no better place to start than Walter Griggs himself. Walter had always been held up as a model of law and order, a man in a black robe, who never raised his voice and never let personal feelings influence his verdicts, or so everyone believed. But Keller had worked long enough to know no one climbs to the top without stepping over something or someone. He put in a request for Walter's sealed court history. The case is no longer open to the public. It took a week of red tape, legal threats, and one carefully worded leak to the press before a clerk reluctantly handed over a stack of archived files. Most were routine: fraud, assault, embezzlement, but one case stood out immediately. A fraud trial from nearly 8 years earlier, involving a young woman accused of stealing nearly $50,000 from a luxury hotel where she had worked under a fake identity. Her name then wasn't Elena Griggs, it was Elena Vance. She was 19 at the time, no prior record. Arrested with clear evidence: emails, security footage, forged documents, an open and shut case. But the charges had been quietly dropped before it went to trial. No explanation, no media coverage. The file included a signed dismissal from Judge Walter Griggs, citing insufficient grounds for prosecution. That was highly unusual. The prosecution had not requested dismissal. In fact, they had prepared to go forward with a strong case, yet the judge had ended it. Personal. After that, Elena vanished from any public record for nearly 5 years. No job history, no social media, no paper trail. She re-emerged in legal documents only after her marriage to Daniel Griggs. By then she had taken his name, and no one seemed to question her past. But Keller did. If Walter had once protected Elena, it meant their relationship started long before Daniel met her, maybe even before Daniel knew she existed, which raised a chilling possibility. What if Elena hadn't fallen in love with Daniel by chance? What if she had been placed in his life, groomed, positioned, set up like a chess piece for a game that only Walter knew he was playing? Margot Pierce was already circling the same theory. She'd begun reaching out to former court employees who had served under Walter. A retired bailiff remembered something odd. Walter often held private conferences in his chambers, especially in high-profile or delicate cases. Elena Vance had been seen entering those chambers alone. No lawyers, no notes, just whispered conversations behind closed doors. One former court clerk admitted that Walter had a habit of taking special interest in certain female defendants. Nothing provable, nothing documented, just a pattern, a dangerous one. As Keller dug deeper, he discovered that Daniel had once tried to look into one of Walter's decisions, a ruling on a real estate case that suspiciously benefited a shell company later connected to Elena. That inquiry had gone nowhere, but maybe it was enough to make Daniel suspicious. Maybe it was the first crack in the perfect image of his father, a crack that widened into a chasm when he uncovered the truth. Keller started to see the outline of something terrifying. Elena, saved from prison by a powerful judge, disappearing for years, then reappearing as the judge's son's wife, and just when Daniel might have discovered the truth, he dies. A clean shot to the head, no evidence, no noise. Whatever bond Walter and Elena had, it hadn't started with love, it had started with power, and now that bond was beginning to unravel. It started with numbers, small inconsistencies, buried deep in Daniel Griggs' financial records. Detective Keller hadn't noticed them at first. Why would he? The investigation was focused on motive, opportunity, weapon, timeline. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized this wasn't just a murder, it was a financial operation, one meticulously designed to look like grief, loss and inheritance. But underneath it all was something colder: theft at a surgical level. Daniel had multiple accounts, checking, savings, investment portfolios, legal retainer funds from clients. Each one appeared untouched. But a forensic accountant working with Keller's team found something strange: a series of wire transfers made in the week leading up to Daniel's death. The amounts weren't large enough to raise red flags individually, but when viewed together, they painted a clear pattern: assets being moved, quietly, carefully, discreetly. The destination of the transfers: offshore accounts registered to anonymous shell companies in Belize and the Isle of Man. There were no names attached, no legal ownership records, available without international cooperation that could take months. But the IP address used to authorize several of the transactions caught Keller's attention. It had pinged off a personal device, connected to Walter Griggs' private network. That was suspicious on its own, but then came the twist. That same device, a tablet registered to Walter, had reportedly been inactive for months. Walter had even claimed it was lost, yet according to digital records, it came online for a brief window, exactly 27 minutes on the morning of Daniel's murder. During that window, 4 wire transfers were made. Once completed, the device went dark again, wiped clean, never to connect again. Whoever had access to that tablet knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't about inheritance, it was about bypassing legal complications entirely. These weren't death-related estate transfers, they were unauthorized liquidations, done before Daniel's body had even gone cold. The money trail pointed to premeditation. Someone had planned not just Daniel's death, but the financial dismantling of his estate, and that someone had either been Walter or someone acting on his behalf with access to his secure network and credentials. Either way, it brought Keller closer to a theory that now felt more like fact. But the most chilling piece wasn't the transfer itself, it was the timing. The last transaction, the largest of the 4, was executed at 6. That meant whoever moved the money did it while standing over a fresh corpse, or worse, while Daniel was still alive, but seconds from death. Margot Pierce, relentless as ever, was already working a parallel track. She had sources inside a private banking firm that specialized in trust setups for the ultra-wealthy. Using a fake identity and a little charm, she learned that Walter had made several inquiries in the months leading up to Daniel's death, questions about consolidating family assets, offshore shielding, and legal loopholes in spousal transfer law. That was before Elena and Daniel's marriage had even begun to fray. On paper it looked like future planning, but in context, it looked like pre-positioning, lining up the pieces before making a move. It wasn't just a murder now, it was a heist. Keller looked at the wall of evidence forming in his office.
financial graphs, screenshots of transfers, timestamps, Walter's sealed case history, and Elena's old court photo faded but haunting. All of it was beginning to lock into place, and yet with each discovery, one thing remained terrifyingly unclear. Was Daniel aware of it all before he died? Had he known the money was being siphoned away? Had he discovered the betrayal before the bullet came? Or was he blindsided by people he trusted most? Either way, the truth was surfacing, and whoever was behind it had begun to lose control of the story. Detective Sam Keller had always believed that houses held memories, not just the sentimental kind. He meant the hidden, physical kind, spaces where secrets were stored, intentionally or not. As the Griggs investigation deepened, the estate began to feel less like a home, and more like a stage, every room immaculate, every surface polished. But Keller knew better. Somewhere behind the glass and veneer the truth had to be hiding. Armed with a new warrant and a quiet sense of urgency, Keller returned to the Griggs residence. Elena and Walter were away, staying at a private villa on the outskirts of town under the guise of escaping the media. Keller had no intention of letting them disappear without pressure. This time, he brought with him a forensic team, scanning equipment and the determination to go deeper. The basement was unfinished, barely mentioned in any of the official architectural plans. It wasn't part of the guided tours journalists had taken after Daniel's death. It was cold, dim, with one bare light bulb hanging from a low ceiling. Storage boxes lined the walls, each labeled with dull, predictable names: seasonal decor, old files, legal archives. But it was the far corner of the room that drew Keller's. A stack of boxes sat unevenly near a wall that didn't quite match the others. The paint was slightly off. The studs behind the drywall responded differently under the tapping of Keller's knuckles. It took less than 10 minutes to find the outline of a hidden door. It swung open silently, revealing a narrow passage into what looked like a soundproofed chamber. Inside was a room not much larger than a walk-in closet, but its contents sent a chill through Keller's spine. On the walls were photographs, dozens of them. Daniel, Elena, Walter, captured in various locations, some clearly taken without their knowledge. Parks, offices, restaurants. One photo showed Daniel meeting with Howard Winslow, the lawyer who had died in the suspicious car crash. Another showed Elena before Daniel's death, sitting alone in a diner with a man who was supposed to be dead, the same lawyer. In the center of the room was a file cabinet, locked. Keller forced it open. Inside were documents, uncirculated court transcripts, surveillance reports, and what appeared to be journal entries written by Daniel himself. In careful slanted handwriting, he had detailed suspicions about his father and his wife. "Something isn't right," one entry read. "I think I'm being watched. Elena's lies are getting harder to ignore. I'm starting to wonder how she ever entered my life to begin with." One folder was labeled simply "Contingency." It contained a copy of the revised will, the same one everyone believed had been destroyed. Daniel hadn't trusted the system, he had hidden it himself. The document confirmed everything the anonymous source had said. Daniel had removed Elena as the primary beneficiary. In her place was an unknown trust, and a final clause read, "If anything happens to me, investigate Elena and Walter first." Keller realized Daniel had seen it coming, not just the betrayal, not just the financial deceit. He had known he was in danger. He had tried to take control in the only way he could, by burying the evidence and hoping it would surface when he couldn't. Keller took photos, made copies, and quietly packed everything into evidence bags. The hidden room had confirmed more than he'd expected. The surveillance photos, the files, the will. It was no longer just suspicion, it was evidence. And yet something still gnawed at him. Why hadn't Daniel run? Why stay under the same roof, sleep beside the woman he suspected, shake hands with the father he no longer trusted? Was he trying to outmaneuver them, or had he been waiting to catch them in the act? Either way, it hadn't worked. But now Keller held the key Daniel had hidden. The game had changed, and for the first time, the hunters were about to become the hunters.
Detective Sam Keller sat quietly in the dark, watching the news break in real time. The trap had been set, and now it was unfolding exactly as planned. A carefully leaked story had hit the local news outlets. Daniel Griggs's missing will found public reading scheduled by district. The announcement was a lie, of course, but it was bait, and Keller was watching to see who would bite first. The very next morning, at precisely 5:42 a.m., Elena Griggs tried to flee the country. She arrived at a private airstrip on the outskirts of town in a black sedan, registered to one of Walter's shell companies. She wore a long coat, oversized sunglasses, and moved with urgency, but not panic. It was clear she believed she had time, that her exit was clean. The man she met at the terminal was already fueling a small jet. Keller and 2 federal agents intercepted her as she stepped out of the car, clutching a leather briefcase. Inside the briefcase were 5 burner phones, a forged passport, $80,000 in untraceable cash, and a flash drive labeled with nothing but the word silence. When asked where she was going, she said nothing. When shown the fake passport with a new name, Emma Vance, she simply lowered her head. Elena was taken into custody without incident, but even under pressure she refused to speak. Not a word, not even a glance of acknowledgement when Keller laid out the findings from the basement. The photos, the journal entries. She remained expressionless, like someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her head. Later that day, Walter Griggs was arrested at his home. Unlike Elena, he didn't resist, didn't ask questions, didn't demand a lawyer. He simply stood from his desk, buttoned his coat, and said, "Do what you have to do." No one, not even Keller, expected what they found hidden in Walter's study drawer. A small pistol wrapped in cloth, wiped clean, but bearing faint traces of gunpowder. Forensic testing would later confirm the ballistic match. The bullet that killed Daniel had been fired from that very gun. Now there were 2 suspects, both connected by marriage, blood and silence. The press exploded. Headlines ran wild with speculation. Father kills son for love, widow or black widow. But none of the noise answered the most disturbing question still lingering: who had pulled the trigger, and why? Keller had his suspicions. The evidence painted a tangled picture of manipulation, betrayal and greed. But it was the flash drive from Elena's briefcase that cracked the case open further. It contained encrypted documents, some financial, some personal, some deeply unsettling. One file was a video recording from a hidden camera in Daniel's study. The date stamp, 1 day before the murder. In the video, Daniel sat at his desk, visibly shaken, speaking to the camera in a low voice. He spoke of betrayal, of secrets too dangerous to share openly. And finally, he said, "If anything happens to me, if this ends badly, it means they got to me first. Don't trust anyone, not even Elena, especially not him." He didn't say Walter's name, he didn't need to. The video ended abruptly, followed by a series of audio clips, recorded phone calls between Walter and an unknown associate, discussing how to handle the transition, clear loose ends, and make it look clean. The words were vague, but their tone was not. This wasn't just about money, this was about control. And yet, despite it all, there was still no confession, no smoking gun in the form of words, just silence from Elena, and a chilling calm from Walter. But now the burden of proof had shifted. The secret will had surfaced. The financial theft had been traced. The hidden room had revealed the betrayal. The noose was tightening. And still, one final question remained unanswered. Who had really planned it all? Elena, the woman who had once disappeared from the world, or Walter, the man who had spent a lifetime behind the bench, learning how to stay untouchable? Either way, their time was running out. The courtroom was packed. Spectators, journalists, legal scholars and members of the public, all craned their necks for a glimpse of the 2 people at the heart of the most disturbing scandal the city had seen in decades. Walter Griggs sat silently at the defense table, dressed in a tailored gray suit, his posture perfect, his face unreadable. Next to him, Elena Griggs sat motionless, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes fixed ahead as if she were somewhere else entirely. No one spoke to them, no one dared. The prosecution's case was damning. Surveillance photos, financial records, the secret room in the basement, the recovered will, and most chilling of all, the flash drive with Daniel's own voice predicting his fate. It had taken months of effort, quiet strategy, and relentless pressure to build the case, but the puzzle pieces had come together, and now, in front of a jury, it all felt like it might finally matter. But as the trial began, new pieces surfaced, ones no one had expected. Margot Pierce, ever the investigative journalist, hadn't stopped digging, even when the trial was underway. She had followed the last remaining clue from the flash drive, the name of the anonymous trust Daniel had created. It had been encoded in metadata on one of the files, a string of numbers that looked meaningless, until Margot cross-referenced them with a registry in a private banking firm in Geneva. The trust had one beneficiary, a child. No name, no birth certificate on record in the U.S., but DNA testing, quietly obtained through a court-ordered subpoena, confirmed what no one had even considered. The child was Elena's, but it wasn't Daniel's, and it wasn't Walter's either. The father was Howard Winslow, the lawyer who died in the mysterious car accident, the man Daniel had secretly met, the one who had tried to help him revise the will. Suddenly, everything took on new meaning. The money, the secrecy, the Winslow hadn't just been Daniel's lawyer, he had been involved with Elena before she ever married into the Griggs family, perhaps even while she was still under Walter's control. Keller's theory unraveled and rewove itself at the same time. Elena had been playing both sides, or maybe she had never been playing at all, just surviving, first rescued, or rather claimed by Walter after her teenage fraud charges, then placed into Daniel's life, then drawn into an affair with a man who seemed to offer her an escape. But when the truth threatened to come out, when Daniel discovered the secret child, the affair, the missing funds, he became expendable, and Winslow too had to be silenced, because he didn't just know the truth, he was part of it. During cross-examination, a quiet moment shattered the entire courtroom. The prosecutor presented a copy of Daniel's revised will, the same one found in the hidden room, now validated by handwriting analysts, and backed by Daniel's private video recording. On the final page was a handwritten note, folded inside the file, addressed simply, "To the one who finds this." It read, "I couldn't stop them. I tried. They are both more dangerous than I ever imagined. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Just promise me they don't get away with it." Not again. The word again hung in the air like smoke. Walter's defense team crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Elena's silence became a burden instead of a shield. She was offered a deal: testify against Walter in exchange for a reduced sentence. But she refused. She never spoke. Not during trial. Not even during sentencing. In the end, Walter was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice. Elena was convicted of accessory to murder and financial conspiracy. Both received life sentences without the possibility of parole, but the story didn't end in the courtroom. The trust remained intact. The child, hidden, protected, anonymous, was quietly placed in the care of a third party overseas, beyond the reach of the Griggs name. And somewhere in a safe place, Daniel's voice lived on, preserved in the files he had left behind. A man who saw the darkness coming and tried, in the end, to outwit it. The house was sold. The files were sealed. The scandal faded from headlines. But for those who knew the truth, the legacy of betrayal and control still lingered. Not every monster leaves blood on their hands. Some leave it written in silence.